Yeah. Family, y'all. Just keep it tight, keep it tight, keep it tight. Oh, right. Yeah. Here we go.
So we're talking about our sad history of division as a church and trying to figure out where it is that the American Catholic Church in the United States comes from as part of this sad history. A quick review then, in 1054, we had the first division in the church when the Orthodox or right-believing Catholic Church in the East excommunicated the Western Church, the Church of Rome, or what we know today as the Roman Catholic Church in the West. After that division in the church then, we had the next division to come roughly around the years 15 to 17 to 1519, when the Roman Catholic Church excommunicated those whom they believed protested. We talked about the likes of Martin Luther protesting or asking respectful questions about the sale of indulgences to get people out of purgatory. That was the next split in the church. We now flash forward in time. The year is now 1870. What was happening in 1870? We had another council of the church. So we remember what it is that a council is. Council comes from that Latin word concilium, which means what? Eyelash. And so the bishops of the church were once again gathered eyelash to eyelash with one another in what we call a council of the church. Where was the council being held in 1870? Was it being held in Nicaea or Lyon or Ephesus or any of the other places that councils were held in the past? No, this time the council was being held for the first time at the Vatican City, and so we refer to it as the First Vatican Council, or Vatican I now. The Second Vatican Council is closer to our day in the 1960s. We refer to that as Vatican II because it was the second time that bishops from all over the world came together at the Vatican to decide matters of doctrine and morals. That was in the 1860s. The First Vatican Council, though, was in 1870. A bit of background. So at that time, Pope Pius IX was the Pope. So follow me now. Pope Pius IX is the Pope. And Pius had a bit of a challenge on his hands. Why? Because now, the year is now 1870, but in 1854, Pope Pius did something that had some reverberations throughout the church. In 1854, he declared that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was born without sin. What do we call this doctrine in the church? We refer to this as the Immaculate Conception. So the Immaculate Conception, conception of course means that a person is conceived, and there's often a misconception because many people think that the Immaculate Conception had to do with Jesus or Jesus' conception. Not at all. The Immaculate Conception was when Mary was conceived. When Mary was conceived, how was she conceived? The word in Latin, this comes from a Latin root which means stain. Immaculate then means without stain, or in English, if you will, without sin. That Mary, the mother of Jesus, Mary of Nazareth, Miriam, she was called in Aramaic, that Miriam was conceived without sin. So what's going to happen then? Suddenly you have the Pope, the Patriarch of Rome, the Bishop of Rome, the head of the Western Church, who is now saying that, oh, by the way, I know the year is 1854, but did you know that when Mary was born some 1900 years ago, she was conceived without sin? This is actually a long-standing belief in the church. Many people, for centuries, some people had believed that Mary was conceived without sin. So this was not a new thought. This was not something that Pope Pius made up. He simply declared that belief. And so now that he made that declaration in 1854, it's 16 years later, and there are different people saying different things now throughout the Roman Church about what it is that the Pope has said. And so when the Pope gathers together the bishops in 1870, he's going to want to bring all of these people together to unite them. Remember that power comes from one or two sources. By organizing people and or by organizing money. And so the Pope has the job of uniting all of these people, all of these bishops, so that they go out of this council with the same message. Is the Pope going to say that he was wrong about this doctrine of the Immaculate Conception? Or that those who had been saying it previous to him were wrong? Is he going to say that? He's not going to say that he was wrong. Instead, he is going to convince the bishops at the First Vatican Council, those cardinals closest to him and those bishops, he is going to convince them of his own infallibility when he speaks on matters of doctrine and morals in his position as the successor of Peter. We know of this, so in 1854 was the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception. In 1870, at the First Vatican Council, we get the formulation of a doctrine in the Roman Church, which is known as what? Infallibility. What is infallibility? It's the belief that this one man, that one person, regardless of how informed he or she believes him or herself to be, is infallible. That he or she can make statements that are not wrong. So what happened now was that we had Pope Pius IX pretending to make this statement in 1870 that he believed was infallible. That he was telling the gospel truth that Miriam, the mother of Yeshua, whom today we know as Jesus, we know her as Mary, that when this Miriam was conceived, she was conceived without sin. So this original sin, this concept invented by Augustine in the late 4th and early 5th centuries, that Mary did not have original sin, but was instead conceived immaculate, without sin. So now that all of these bishops closest to the Pope have all drunk the Kool-Aid and sung the Mickey Mouse song, all of them are saying, yes, the Pope is infallible. Yes, the Pope is infallible. If the Pope points to the sky and says the sky is green, and says that he declares it in his authority as the follower of the successor of Peter, then all this will say that, yes, the sky is green. Wait a minute. No. In the American Catholic Church, we love the Pope, we respect the Pope, we recognize him as the successor of Peter, as the first among equal, the primus inter pares, but this whole notion of infallibility, that any person, regardless of who he or she is, right? We all put our pants on one leg at a time, we're all human beings, we're all fallible. Interestingly, there have only been two doctrines that have been declared dogmas, infallible dogmas by the Church. The first, of course, was this doctrine in 1854, the Immaculate Conception, and the second one was the dogma of the Assumption. What was the dogma of the Assumption? That, again, this doesn't refer to Jesus, but it refers to the Blessed Virgin Mary, to Miriam, the mother of Jesus in Nazareth, so that Mary, at the end of her life, was assumed body and soul into heavenly glory. So that Mary, instead of dying like the rest of us, was assumed body and soul into heavenly glory. Is this even an issue in the Orthodox Catholic Church, in the East, in the Orthodox or right-believing Church of the East? Is this even an issue? What do they believe about Mary? Do they believe that Mary was assumed into heaven? No, that's a Roman Catholic belief. And so what happens is the Orthodox Church has always believed in the dormition of Mary. Dormition, we may recognize the root of that word, dormitory, or in Spanish, dormir. What is dormir? To sleep. What did Mary do at the end of her life? She fell asleep, as all of us do. Mary succumbed to death. Is there anything wrong with believing that? Right? We're all human. We all die. If Mary was human, then Mary died. There was nothing wrong. There has been nothing wrong in the Eastern Church in believing in the dormition of Mary. That once Mary died, she enjoyed the presence of God in the same way that all of the rest of us do. So in the Orthodox Church, this is not an issue, but in the Roman Catholic Church, then we've had these dogmas of the Immaculate Conception and of the Assumption. Both, interestingly, both dogmas by the Roman Catholic Church have to do with Mary. You may remember the early 1990s. There was the fear at that time that Pope John Paul II, he was bordering on, according to the gossip in the Roman church, that he was going to declare a third dogma of the church, and that it had to do with Mary. If you read the writings, what was the thought? That Mary was the co-redemptrix, or the co-redeemer. Do you remember Pope John Paul II? Pope John Paul II, who is now a saint in the Roman church, interestingly. On his shield, what did he have? He had a big M. Who was the M for? The M was for Mary. The thought was in the early 90s, the fear was that John Paul II was going to say that Mary was the co-redeemer, that yes, Jesus redeemed us. What does it mean to be a co-redeemer? That Jesus redeemed us, but it was only with Mary's help. Yikes. Imagine the division that would have brought to the church. How interesting, because in 1870, Pope Pius, we don't believe that he was an evil man. We don't question his intentions. It's simply the case that he thought that he was going to unite the church in 1870 by this proclamation of his own infallibility. He thought that would bring us all together. And what happened? Instead, it split the church again. So now we had this split in 1054 between the Orthodox or right-believing Catholic Church and the Roman Church. And then we had another split in the church in 1517 to 1519 between the Roman Church and between those who protested or those who saw themselves as reforming the church. And now in 1870, we have another split then between the Roman Church and the Old Catholic Church. Have you ever heard of the Old Catholic Church? Because it's actually from the Old Catholic Church that the American Catholic Church comes. Which is why this is so important, and it's an important piece of our history, because we as American Catholics trace ourselves back through the Old Catholic Church to the Roman Catholic Church to the Catholic Church, which existed before 1054, before it was divided. That's how we trace our way back to the apostles. So a bit on the history of the Old Catholic Church then. So whereas Pope Pius X was hoping to be able to unite all Catholics by this proclamation of his own infallibility when he proclaimed the Immaculate Conception, instead of leading to unity in the church, it actually resulted in this division between the Roman Church and now the Old Catholic Church. So the Old Catholic Church was formed in 1889. So it took some time to gather, but essentially what happened was after this proclamation of the Pope's infallibility, it was the same as in the days of Martin Luther. There were certain bishops who respectfully had their differences and raised questions about this new teaching in the church. And so some of these bishops finally, in the years leading up to 1889, decided, you know what? The Roman Church is not willing to budge. They believe that this person, regardless of who he or she is and how informed he or she believes him or herself to be, that this person, the Pope, is infallible. We cannot believe that. That is not part of our tradition as a church. We have never believed this about anyone. This new and radical thought is intolerable. We as Catholic bishops cannot in good conscience follow this. And so they split from the church and formed what was known as the Union of Utrecht. Utrecht is a is a bishopric in current day Netherlands. So various bishops in Germany and in Northern Europe and in what today is known as the Netherlands formed part of this Union of Utrecht, which simply was this group of faithful Catholics and their bishops who could not buy this argument for infallibility. That any one person could be infallible. And so they formed their own church in 1889. Why is this split different from this group of Protestants? Well, we remember the term apostolic succession. What does apostolic succession mean? Apostolic succession means that a person who is currently a bishop believes that the person who laid hands on him or her had hands laid on him or her, and it traces its all the way back to the apostles. So that somehow the apostles, we remember the words of that were attributed to St. Paul in the second letter of Timothy, stir into flame the gifts that you received when I laid my hands on you. It was that belief that the early apostles laid hands on others, conferring on them the gift of the Spirit. We see this even today. At Deacon John's ordination recently, what was the symbol? The Archbishop laid his hands on Deacon John, and anyone else who had already received the Spirit, meaning any ordained minister, Father Jamie, Deacon Roy, Deacon Cleophas, anyone else who was ordained in the crowd, laid their hands on Deacon John during his ordination as a symbol of sharing with him the Spirit. The same happens in episcopal consecrations. Ooh, that was a fancy word. When a person is consecrated a bishop, we call that an episcopal consecration. And so when a person is consecrated a bishop, when a bishop lays hands on another person with the intention to consecrate that person, then that person is now a bishop. And so, if today for lunch, when Susie goes out today and has lunch with Bishop Joe Vasquez, Bishop of the Roman Catholic Church here in Austin, and after lunch she says, Bishop Vasquez, I have a favor to ask of you. Do you mind just putting your hands on my head and consecrating me a bishop? And if Bishop Vasquez is amenable to doing that, then Bishop Vasquez could consecrate Susie, good for you Susie, a bishop of the church today. Will Bishop Vasquez do that today after lunch? I doubt it. When you're part of the Mickey Mouse Club, you have to sing the Mickey Mouse song. For him to deviate from that, he would be singing a radically different song, and he would find himself in deep waters with those above him. So I doubt that he'll do that, Susie, but at the same time, that's part of this apostolic succession. When a validly consecrated bishop, whether that's Bishop Joe Vasquez of the Roman Catholic Diocese, whether that's Archbishop William Johnson of the American Catholic Church, whoever it is, if you are a validly consecrated bishop, and when you lay hands on another person with the intent to consecrate that person, then that person is now validly consecrated and is a validly consecrated bishop. So this belief in apostolic succession simply means that these people believe that the people who've laid hands on them, if we can trace that line all the way back to the apostles. The Roman Catholic Church, the Orthodox Catholic Church, the American Catholic Church, all old Catholic churches, all the churches that have apostolic succession believe they can trace their way back to the apostles. So what was different about this split in 1870 from the split in 1517 to 1519? Here we had bishops who split in 1054. We had the four patriarchs in the east who excommunicated the patriarch in the west, the Patriarch of Rome, and vice versa, all excommunicating one another. They were all bishops excommunicating one another. So they all had apostolic succession. So the Orthodox or right-believing Catholic Church had apostolic succession, and the Roman Church had apostolic succession. They could both trace their succession back to the apostles. So, we're going to put in blue then those who have apostolic succession. The Orthodox Church had apostolic succession, and the Roman Church had apostolic succession, which is why we say that we now had two valid expressions of Catholicism. How was the split with Father Martin Luther, or Saint Martin Luther if you prefer, how is that split different? Was Martin Luther a bishop? No. Which simply means that while the Roman Catholic Church has apostolic succession, the fact that Martin Luther was not a bishop means that he could lay his hands on another person's hands, but if Father Martin Luther lays his hands on another person, is that person going to be a bishop? If Father Jamie were to lay his hands on another person, Deacon Cleophas, come up here, I'm going to consecrate you a bishop right now. Can Father Jamie consecrate you a bishop? Father Jamie has not received that gift, that authority. Apostolic succession means that it has been passed down from one bishop to the next. And so, whichever bishop we want to point to, whether it's of the Orthodox Catholic Church, or of the Roman Church, or the American Catholic Church, what makes them unique is that one bishop shared the gift with another bishop, who shared the gift with another bishop, and on and on. Father Martin Luther was not a bishop. Father Martin Luther didn't have apostolic succession. And so from now on, in these churches of the Reformers, with Baptists and Lutherans and Methodists and Episcopalians and on and on and on, this apostolic succession is meaningless. It is not important. You ask your friends who are Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, Lutherans, you name it, you ask them how important apostolic succession is for them, and they'll likely laugh. It's just not. It's not part of their tradition, right? For them, the fact that they have helped to reform the church in ways that they believe that Christ intended the church to be, that this thing of apostolic succession, I'm sure that many of them would look at it as an invention, and they would rightfully ask questions. The question is, can you really trace your way all the way back to Peter? First of all, this is the question. Did Jesus lay his hands on Peter? We don't have any stories on it. Yes, we have the story of Jesus breathing his Spirit on the apostles saying, receive the Holy Spirit. Okay, so that counts maybe as Peter's receiving the Holy Spirit. But do we have any stories of Peter laying Peter's hands on someone else and saying, in effect, receive the Holy Spirit? Or saying, I consecrate you a bishop? Was Peter a bishop in the same way that we think of bishops today? As we've learned in other courses, the bishops were overseers of the church, and they didn't see themselves as having this special title, bishop, which they needed to hand down in certain ways. And so they rightfully, the reformers of the church, rightfully have various criticisms of apostolic succession. It's not important. But if apostolic succession is important to you, it's obviously important for persons in the Orthodox Catholic Church. It's obviously important to people in the Roman Catholic Church. It's important for them to know that Bishop Joe Vasquez of the Roman Catholic Diocese is a validly consecrated bishop. That's important for Roman Catholics. Well, I've got good news for you. You can sleep well at night. In the American Catholic Church, we have validly consecrated bishops as well. How? Because in 1870, when we had the Pope proclaiming himself infallible, by the Vatican Council, of course, and when they split in 1889 at Utrecht, why did they center around Utrecht? Because the Archbishop of Utrecht had permission of the Vatican to be able to consecrate bishops without the permission of Rome. Follow me now. In order for Bishop Vasquez to consecrate another person like Susie, what happens is he needs to have Rome's permission. So Susie, before you go to lunch with Bishop Vasquez, he needs to be warned because he needs to make a call over to the Vatican and ask their permission to consecrate you a bishop. All bishops need the permission of the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, to be able to consecrate bishops in this Roman Catholic Church. What happened with the Bishop of Utrecht then? Since the 13th century, it was 1215. The year was 1215 when Pope Eugene III gave the Archbishop of Utrecht the right to consecrate bishops without the Pope's approval. That was in 1215, during the time of St. Francis of Assisi. Think of the implications now. All of you who are bishops gathered at this council, if you want to consecrate someone a bishop, you need to ask my permission as Pope. There's only one person who has a special privilege and doesn't have to ask me, and that is the Archbishop of Utrecht. Since 1215, he has not had to ask permission of Rome to consecrate another bishop. So we trust his judgment. If he is off to lunch this afternoon with Susie, you're wasting your time with Bishop Vasquez. Better go with the Archbishop of Utrecht, right? Because the Archbishop of Utrecht then has the power to be able to validly consecrate you as a bishop without Rome's authority. Why did they meet in Utrecht in 1889? Because the Archbishop of Utrecht, did he decide to stay in the Roman Church? Or did he have difficulties with this new teaching of the Roman Church? He had difficulties with this new teaching of the Roman Church. And so now suddenly we have this Archbishop who since 1215, and this is a rite that was confirmed again in 1225 by the Fourth Lateran Council. It reaffirmed this decision by Pope Eugene III in 1215. And then in 1520, how interesting that Leo X again reaffirmed that the Archbishop of Utrecht has the right to consecrate bishops without my approval. So throughout the history of the church, we've had this person, the Archbishop of Utrecht, who had the right to consecrate bishops without the permission of Rome. So the danger was that once the split happened in 1889 with the Utrecht Union, the Roman Catholic Church, yes, still claims to have apostolic succession, but the Archbishop of Utrecht also enjoyed apostolic succession and did not need the permission of the Pope to consecrate other bishops. Do you see where this is going to go? The Archbishop of Utrecht then is going to be able to lay his hands on Susie, or Herbert, or Louis, or Deacon Cleophas, or anyone else, and to validly consecrate him or her a bishop without the approval of Rome. Now it would be fascinating because in order to claim apostolic succession, with Archbishop Johnson, as we're going to see, for instance, he claims apostolic succession not only through the old Catholic Church, which is true, but also from the Roman Church and the Orthodox Church as well. We're going to see how it is that as part of his family tree, his lineage, his apostolic succession, he has lines that go back through the old Catholic Church and through the Roman Catholic Church and through the Orthodox Catholic Church back to the apostles. It's going to be fascinating, so fasten your seatbelts there. But right now we're talking about the old Catholics. So the old Catholics then broke off in 1889 from the Roman Catholic Church, and the old Catholic Church is recognized by the Roman Catholic Church. Let me say that again. The old Catholic Church, yes, is recognized by the Roman Catholic Church. And so this church of which we're part and in which we find our roots then, it says in the pastoral manual of the Diocese of Austin, the Roman Catholic Diocese of Austin recognizes the baptisms performed in the old Catholic Church as valid. The sacraments of the Catholic Church, that's why, we'll come to it a little later, but how it is that the Roman Catholic Church, despite what it is that individual priests and or bishops have said, some of them have begged to differ, but the Roman Catholic Church, even the popes have said that the old Catholic Church enjoys valid sacraments. Father Jamie is a validly ordained priest and administers valid sacraments. We'll come back to that. We're still in the history of the old Catholic Church then. What happened after 1889? So in 1889, we had the Declaration of Utrecht, which caused this separation of old Catholics, the old Catholic Church from the Roman Catholic Church. Where does the word old Catholic come from? Because these people believed that they were following in the footsteps of the old church, of the primitive church, of the Catholic Church. So it wasn't these innovations by Rome and the Roman Church. They were going back to the old church. So it depends on how you look at something like that. You could look at them and you could blame them for fracturing the church. But isn't that the same that could be said here of the Roman Church? Of the division that occurred here? Isn't that similar to what happened here? So yes, we can say that we've excommunicated them, and we can call them names. We can do the same here, but at the same time, we recognize that there are validly consecrated bishops with apostolic succession who continue to trace their way back to the apostles. Here there were validly consecrated bishops in the Roman Church who traced their way back to the apostles. And so you could, if you wanted, you could paint them as fracturing the church, as dividing the church, or you could paint them as simply trying to unite the church by laying aside false pretenses that demand rigid conformity to one person's belief or opinions. You could say, wait a minute, do we all have to conform to one person's belief and opinions? Do we have to be rigid about that? Just because one person believes that Mary was born without sin, do we all have to believe that? So do we have to rigidly conform to that? Or do we follow in the footsteps of these other bishops and priests and laypersons throughout the world who believe that, that's not necessary? It's fascinating because in the next 11 years, by 1900, the old Catholic Church had grown to 15 million people worldwide. And so yes, there are different Catholic churches of different sizes. We talked about currently the largest church Catholic Church in the world is the Roman Church, which has 1 billion followers. After that, we talked about the Orthodox Catholic Church that excommunicated them, how they have some 300 million adherents. But within 11 years, the old Catholic Church had 15 million members. Another word that we use for Old Catholic is independent Catholic, which is why we refer to this course as a course in independent Catholicism. Because what's happening now, instead of being subject to Rome and having to get Rome's permission in the same way that Bishop Joe Vasquez has to, Bishop Vasquez, got news for you, but if you want to consecrate Susie, you better make a phone call first. With the Bishop of Utrecht and his successors, do they have to call Rome for Rome's permission? Not at all. That's craziness. They enjoy apostolic succession, and if for whatever reason they decide to consecrate Susie a bishop this afternoon, they have that prerogative. And so they are independent from Rome, which is why we often refer to ourselves as part of the tradition of independent Catholicism. The other word that we often hear is autocephalous. We are autocephalous Catholic churches. Autocephalous is simply a fancy word meaning self-governing. We are self-governing. Literally, the Greek word means having its own head. So we are churches that have our own, each church has its own head. Who is the presiding Archbishop of the American Catholic Church in the United States? Presiding Archbishop William Johnson. It is an autocephalous church. Each church has its own head, but each church enjoys apostolic succession. We don't have to all be together here singing the Mickey Mouse song in order for us to have valid sacraments. So what a radical break in the church. Yes, the break in 1054 was significant. Yes, the break in 1517 to 1519 was significant. This break in 1870 to 1889 was significant because we had a break similar to that of the Roman Church from the Orthodox Church, where we had validly consecrated bishops who had the authority to consecrate other bishops without the permission of Rome. There would be many more divisions, though, over the next century. I mean, if we were to be honest, so that was by 1900, the division occurred in 1889. By 1900, we had 15 million old Catholics. But there have been other sad divisions in the church. We remember, for instance, in 1968, and he was old enough to remember 1968, who was the Pope at the time? The Pope was Pope Pius VI. And what did he declare? It was the controversy over the supposed evil of contraceptives. How fascinating that all of that was based on a 1970s understanding of human sexuality. People, we've grown in our understanding during the last 40 years. We no longer believe the same things that we believed 40 years ago with respect to human sexuality. And in fact, here in Austin, Texas, it's a fascinating, rich story that we have because the inventor of the birth control pill, Esteban Kaufman, his son lives here in Austin, Texas. His son, Pedro Kaufman, was on the board with me at San Juan Diego Catholic High School, was helping us to lead this high school within the Roman Catholic Church. His father invented the birth control pill, helped aid in that discovery. And it was fascinating because he loves to tell the story of his father meeting Pope Pius VI. And he tells the story of how his father, Esteban Kaufman, went over. Esteban was a Hungarian immigrant who came and met his wife in Mexico and did his work in Mexico. And when he went over to Rome to visit the Vatican and had an audience with the Pope, Paul VI, according to his son's story, Paul VI began to deride him and talk about what a great evil it is that he created in this world by helping aid the invention of birth control. And Pedro says that his father simply looked at the Pope and said something to the effect of, "With all due respect, I believe I've done a good thing." Here we had the Pope saying something is so evil, birth control, based on this 1970s sexuality, and we had this Roman Catholic inventor of the birth control pill, visiting his Pope and saying, I believe that I've done a good thing. And can any of us disagree when we look around and see how it is that for persons who are not ready, for whatever reasons, to be parents, how it is that it has saved our world? I mean, in many ways, Stefan Kaufmann is a saint in heaven, in my estimation, for the good work that he did. So how interesting that there have been other breaks in the church over issues like contraception in the 1960s. In 1969 and 1968, when he proclaimed that, Humanae Vitae, that doctrine was called, there were all sorts of American priests and bishops who really differed with that, and who were signing petitions, and who were really marginalized from the church, and even made to leave the church because of their stance on that one single issue. Other splits in the church, 1994. Do you remember 1994? When Pope John Paul II said that we will not even discuss the issue of women in the church, of women in ordained ministry in the church. Another division in the church. Is this an issue for us in the American Catholic Church? Not at all. We impose no artificial barriers to the sacraments, including the sacrament of holy orders. So if you feel called to ordain ministry, regardless of whether you are a man or a woman, regardless of whether you are married or single or in whatever relationship, all of us are called to follow the promptings of the Spirit in our lives. And so for John Paul II in 1994 to say that there will be no discussion on the ordination of women in the church, it's fascinating, especially in light of the fact that Pope Francis now has begun to crack open that conversation. Bishop John McCarthy here in Austin, our retired bishop here in Austin, he loves to tell the story. Ask him about it sometime. He tells the story of when John Paul II came to the United States, came to San Antonio, and was having lunch with all of the bishops of Texas before celebrating Mass that day. According to Bishop McCarthy, you can ask him yourself, he loves telling the story of how it was that during lunch that day, he was sitting not too far from the Pope, and he said to the Pope in words similar to, you know, Holy Father, we've been talking here in the United States about the possibility of ordaining women. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could acknowledge the gifts of women by ordaining women in the Roman Catholic Church? And according to Bishop McCarthy, he loves telling the story, he says that the Pope's response, Pope John Paul II, while he was eating, paused after hearing those remarks from Bishop McCarthy about the possible ordination of women in the church, and said something to the effect of, these are good mashed potatoes. Meaning, he was not going to talk about it. It was not going to be a conversation. And in 1994, he said, we will not discuss the issue. On the one hand, we think that these things will lead to unity, so that we're all together and are all singing the Mickey Mouse song. What happens instead, it leads to division. And so, as a result, what we see this history of division over time, and how it is that the American Catholic Church fits within it as part of the old Catholic Church, which split from the Roman Church in the same way that the Roman Church split from the Orthodox or right-believing Catholic Church in 1054. All of these churches, though, enjoying apostolic succession. No one will question the apostolic succession of Bishop Joe Vasquez of the Roman Catholic Church. How interesting that people would question the apostolic succession of bishops within the old Catholic Church, including the American Catholic Church. A bit ironic, considering the history.